Welcome to the Unusual History of Everything, the podcast that uncovers the unusual history of everything around us. I'm Karen Lacey.
And I'm Melanie Dellis. On this episode, we examine some archaeological finds that point to a time when blood rituals allowed people to communicate with the gods and seek glory in the afterlife.
Blood, as we all know, is the life force of humans and animals alike. And so, for thousands of years, it was believed that blood would in turn give the gods life, which would make the gods want to do nice things for the people. These blood rituals weren't just animal and human sacrifices. They also included small amounts of blood used in ritualistic ways.
But let's start with the ancient Greeks, of course.
Duh.
They liked to sacrifice animals to various gods and goddesses, and the color and type of animal was important because they liked to coordinate with the gods' characteristics. I bet you thought I was going to say they like to coordinate with the gods' clothes or like color coordinate with the gods.
Their jewelry.
Right, their jewelry, their hairstyle. For example, they sacrificed black animals to the gods and goddesses of the underworld for obvious dark reasons. They sacrificed their fastest horses to the sun god Helios because he drove a chariot of horses across the sky every day. They sacrificed pregnant pigs to Demeter because she is a mother and the goddess of agriculture, and black dogs to Hecate because one of her animal familiars is a black she-dog. It was also very common for bulls to be sacrificed to fertility gods in ancient Greece and other civilizations because bulls represented the cosmic powers of fertility. So the Greeks sacrificed to Zeus Chthonios, the bull of the earth, the Norse sacrificed to Freyr, and India sacrificed to Indra, the bull of heaven.
We may not be as into blood rituals nowadays, but in ancient times it was the norm when sacrificing and communicating with the gods. Most ancient cultures did it, but it wasn't always a full-on sacrifice. Sometimes all that was necessary was a small cut to offer that precious lifeblood. For example, the ancient Maya, circa 1200 BC to 900 AD, practiced chakab, a bloodletting ritual the nobles performed to speak with their ancestors and their gods. Chakab means penance, which could be related to the Yucatanan word for dripper, which is chahab. Yucatanan was a branch of the Maya language, by the way.
Both Maya men and women performed the chahab, cutting any place on their bodies, even the tongue, lips, and genitals. These rituals were only done on certain dates in their solar ritual calendar, such as when a new king came to power, or royal births, deaths, or marriages. The rituals were done in private, usually in temple rooms at the top of pyramids. Down below, at the base of the pyramid, people would be celebrating. It is said that when they released their blood, they would go into a trance and have supernatural visions that allowed them to communicate with their ancestors and gods. This was one way the people in power would show their subjects that they were special and could speak with the dead and the gods in order to get their advice on successful battles, good harvests, and the like.
American archaeologist Jessica Munson of Lycoming College found that most references to Maya blood rituals were glyphs inscribed on monuments along the Usumacinta River in Guatemala and in southeastern Maya lowlands. But illustrations on some murals related to blood rituals have been found in Maya sites at Palenque in southern Mexico and Yaxchilan in Chiapas state in Mexico and in Huacatun in Guatemala. These give us glimpses as to how the ceremonies went. The Maya would use sharp objects such as obsidian blades, stingray spines, curved bones, perforators, and knotted ropes to cut themselves. And they used bark paper to collect the blood and pour it into pottery or baskets. The Maya site at the Yaxchilan has carved on 3 door lintels showing Lady Zuk, circa 681 BC, performing a bloodletting ritual during her husband's ascension to the throne by piercing her tongue and running a knotted rope through the hole.
Ugh.
She then pours the blood into a bowl as the vision serpent, which is a representation of the gateway to the spirit world, rises from the bowl and speaks to her.
Human sacrifice was also very prominent in many ancient cultures. Again, this form of sacrifice was a way to communicate with the gods, ask for fertility of the lands, and even for the continuation of the sun shining on earth. In Mexico, for example, during the 14th century, the Aztec and Nahua people sacrificed up to 20,000 people every year in order to nourish the sun and keep it shining. According to Aztec cosmology, the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, which you know I said horribly, was always fighting darkness, and if darkness won, the world would end. And the only way to help the sun god was to feed, here we go again, Huitzilopochtli, human hearts and blood, which was often done willingly because that would guarantee you a spot in his army in the afterlife. Apparently, that was a sought-after position.
In 1521, Andres de Tiapa, one of the Spanish conquistadors, wrote of the human sacrifice he witnessed. But it was so horrific that modern historians thought he exaggerated so that it would justify the murder of the Aztec emperor Montezuma and the destruction of Tenochtitlan and the enslavement of the people. He wrote about Aztec priests slicing open people's chests with obsidian blades, pulling out their hearts that were still beating and offering them to the gods, and then pushing the bodies down the many steps of the Templo Mayor, which was their main temple, as the blood turned the sides of the temple red. Tapa also described 2 towers on either side of Templo Mayor that were made out of human skulls, and a tall rack that displayed thousands of other human skulls.
In 2015 and 2018, archaeologists excavated Templo Mayor in Mexico City and proved what Tapia said was all true. They discovered the skull towers and skull racks. Proof of the Aztecs' human sacrifice blood rituals were discovered, and it is now thought that 80,400 men, women, and children were sacrificed for the inauguration of Templo Mayor alone. It seems excessive to say the least, but the point of so many sacrifices was also to show their enemies how strong the Aztec Empire was. Imagine how imposing towers and racks full of 80,000 skulls were to people thinking about invading.
Oh, definitely.
It's so sad.
And a lot of times these sacrifices were people that they had, like, they just won a battle, and these were, like, the prisoners.
Yeah, the prisoners, they were slaves. It was not often that they were actually the Aztec people.
Right.
So sad. Still very sad. That's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
For just the inauguration of that temple.
But it was also, like, over a period of time, too, for, like, the other stuff that was added onto it. So...
It was for the inauguration of that temple, so that's like a one day.
A lot of people.
No, but I mean, it's got to take more than one day to kill 80,000.
Yeah, it would have to have been built over time.
Right.
Well, anyway, many cultures also perform blood rituals to offer penance for their sins in the hopes that the gods would forgive them. In West Africa, the Yoruba people performed blood sacrifices to the earth deities who are divine punishers of sin. It used to be the sacrifice was human, but in modern times, a chicken or a goat worked. If the sacrifice is to forgive the sins of the entire village, hundreds of animals could perish. So thankfully, humans are no longer the sacrifice of choice.
Yeah, thankfully.
The West Africans also ritually kill animals before building a house or a shrine. The blood is poured around the perimeter and the body is put into the main post hole for the house. They do this to appease the earth deities, but also to ask for the supernatural powers that own the land if the new owners could live there without any malevolent occurrences.
You know, it reminds me of the sin eaters too, which we're gonna talk about in another week or two in another podcast. But they do kind of the same thing. You know, they're taking the sin away from the dead person. They're not, but it doesn't really have anything to do with blood. But it's a similar type of thing, and
it's
also,
almost like killing the sin in some way. Like you take the sin, this animal takes the sin, and then you kill the animal, and that way the sin is gone.
And it also reminds me, what you just said, also reminds me of when the Jews in Egypt took
with the lambs.
With the lambs, they took and put it on the blood,
for the
house.
Firstborn.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, like there are so many instances of this type of blood ritual like,
all over
the world. Yeah. I think it's pretty wild how these cultures come up with the same type of idea for blood with their gods, communicating with their gods, asking for protection or forgiveness. And many of these cultures didn't even know about each other, you know, but we all come up with the same type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that speaks to some like super, super older thing that got passed down, you know, like when way, way, way long time ago. Or, you know, it's one of those instances of like multiple places are kind of inventing this thing at the same time because it just makes sense. It's really fascinating how so many things are similar. Like a small little belief is maybe slightly differently seen or performed or whatever, but it has the same like little core idea.
Exactly. Let's go back to ancient Greece and even Rome, actually, because blood rituals weren't just about sacrifice. Sometimes it was about curing the sick. We are going to do another podcast that really focuses in on the weird things people ate, drank, or did to cure various ailments, but we wanted to end this episode with a doozy. Pliny the Elder, a Roman historian, along with several ancient medical doctors, touted the magical benefits of blood to cure epilepsy. Sounds easy and great, right? The catch? You had to drink it from the neck of a dead gladiator. That's right, after a fight was over, people in the crowd would rush the dead or dying body of the losing gladiator and drink his blood. Surprisingly, people did it often. Really surprising is that people continued to do it for centuries. When gladiator fighting stopped in 400 AD, doctors switched it to drinking the blood of executed criminals, particularly the ones who were beheaded. This wonderful tradition lasted until the early 20th century, believe it or not.
Gosh, I wonder, because I'm thinking of like, I know this is in like Rome and Greece and everything like that, but I'm like, think about taking that to like the French Revolution, or when a whole bunch of people were headed like in England, like Anne Boleyn or something. I'm like, people did like dip like handkerchiefs and stuff in the blood of a lot of these people.
Yeah.
As like mementos and stuff like that. And so it's kind of like, it seems like very similar again to kind of the same concept or idea for different reasons. But yeah, I mean, blood it's crazy. It's a symbol in so many different things.
So I was thinking about like, why would you want to use that blood to cure something like epilepsy, or really they probably did it for more things than just epilepsy. And I was reading this one article that talked about how the criminal who's being executed, their body would go into so much shock at the moment of being beheaded, or usually
Like,
it was beheading.
like,
It wasn't like a hanging or something.
Right.
It had to be some sort of thing where the blood would come out, right? So their body would be in so much shock when they would get beheaded that it would send kind of this weird electrical current through the body that jolted something in the blood. And so the people thought that if they drank that blood at the moment that the head falls or whatever, not to be so morbid, but that that blood would give them
Like something special.
like the endorphins, or I don't know what causes that jolt in the dead person's blood, but it would do something. It was different than just before they were being killed.
Right.
You know, there was something about it that shocked the body. And then the same article, this doctor was like, but what was probably really happening is that it worked on a few people who had epilepsy. And so they just said, okay, that's the cure. But what was really happening was the person who had epilepsy was watching the execution, and the shock of the execution and watching somebody die in such a horrific way shocked their own body into not having a seizure. So I don't know which one is true, if they're both, crap. I don't know. But
It's kind of fascinating, though.
It's fascinating, yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. You can follow the Unusual History of Everything podcast on Instagram at The Unusual History of Everything, and on Facebook at The Unusual History of Everything podcast. And find our show notes on www.musecuratorial.com. The Unusual History of Everything is written, produced, and directed by Melanie Dellis and Karen Lacey.
New episodes air every Tuesday on all podcast outlets. Be sure to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode, and leave us a review. You can also see photos from our episodes and more on our website, Instagram, and Facebook. Thanks for listening. I'm Melanie Dellis.
And I'm Karen Lacey, your host for The Unusual History of Everything.
Da, da, da.